We want now to take 15 minutes for the panel to digest and react to these two presentations about the nature of the visitors that are to come. So let me start the conversation. I think, and I hope that in time we'll be rolling, but let me ask you all panelists about the prediction that Donna Fernandez made about demographics. Will zoos need to change if their primary visitors are non-white, non-nuclear families? Does that matter? Don, you're nodding. Do you have an opinion?
Sure, and a couple other panelists could probably chime in here too, because we've done some significant work internationally, most recently for me in Malaysia and in Argentina. And so, there are significantly different cultures around the world, and the United States is coming to represent a lot of those cultures, as Donna pointed out. And so Hispanics, at least in Latin America, where I've been working for the last 25 years, really would rather go to the zoo, I guess, in the late afternoon, kind of after the hot period of the day, the siesta period. What I noticed in Malaysia is Singapore has the night safari, and that's densely packed at night. And so what we're seeing at the National Zoo, where we have a significant percentage of different cultures, also because of embassies and embassy staff and things like that, is we're seeing very similar behaviors. The complexion of the zoo changes from the morning to the evening. So I'm guessing that we would be thinking about our hours. If a large percentage of our public becomes Muslim, we'll have to have prayer rooms next to our restrooms, as they do in Malaysia, throughout the country, even on the throughways. And so there are a lot of design and programmatic features that may have to change with changing cultures.
Ron?
I think that both Donna and Jesse hit on, in some ways, the two biggest challenges for our profession. And one of them is animal welfare, the other is diversity. And we've been struggling with this internally for a long time. Since we're only supposed to take 1 minute to do this, I will just focus for the moment on the diversity issue. We are responsible for how we build the staff that works at the zoo, but it's the board who picks us. And so this representation, this very not diverse representation of leadership within the zoo field, is emblematic of a disconnect that boards are looking for different qualities. They're not necessarily focused on the diversity issue the way we might be. They tend to be more focused on financial acumen and management expertise and technical expertise. So I think one of the challenges for us going forward is how do we boldly help board leadership understand just how critical this demographic future is.
Please.
I just want to make a couple comments on, we've been focused over the last 100 years on racial distinction in America, where in fact we're seeing a lot greater blending. And so I think that when we start to look at how many races are represented within an individual, we'll start to see that there's a Beijing of the population. It's not so much looking at the distinctions. What concerns me more in some of the demographics that we didn't talk about is the distinction between the cultural elite and the what I would call the working class, or frankly the underclass in America. Because I think that we're seeing a great split there, and they are two separate cultures that are living alongside one another with completely different understandings and expectations of their experience. So I think that as we think 100 years down the road, that relationship is going to be more at issue than the complexion of what's going on. I think, and the other point I wanted to make was the conversation about our choice of media use. it's now. They are 2 years from now before visiting with an iPad will allow you access to your own knowledge around an interpretive experience. And I think that we've been afraid of that technology in the way that we were afraid of cars and planes. And I think we're beyond that. At this point, it's not a question of how does media influence our understanding, but how is the seamlessness of that experience creating depth of experience. I think if we embrace the technologies in the short term, 100 years from now, it won't be a question of what the media is, but how that media is really creating a much deeper and richer knowledge world.
Great, and so let me go from there. Dr. Donahue, Jesse just suggested that touch will be an increasing part of the experience in visiting zoos. Does anybody want to agree or disagree or react to that prediction? Please.
I think that's happening right now. I mean, we're all looking at ways to get people closer to our animals in a humane, respectful way, and that is, at the heart of our institutions. And I think what's so funny is that's so cyclic. If you go back in time, you'll see we keep coming back to the same issue. People want the authentic animal experience. That's what drives our whole existence, and we'll keep finding better, safer, more humane ways to do that. So I think it's absolutely true, and I think as we get more digital entertainment out there, that is our distinguishing factor. I'll talk more about it tomorrow, but that's what people come to zoos for.
Anna, did you want?
I think there'll be the technology to simulate touch. I think that you'll be able to, when watching on the video, put on a glove and pet the animal and feel what a snake skin feels like and feel the fur of this and smell it. I think that, it's not that hard to believe you look at what's happening in, simulation, you'd be able to experience it remotely, at least touch.
I was wondering about that. We had a prediction about technology and putting people more of at a distance, and then a different prediction involving direct touch, and now you've combined the two. And then, Keith, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of animal welfare, because if touch and animal welfare certainly are joined together. Ron?
Yeah, first of all, we have a 4D simulation. Some of you, I think, have experienced it, where you actually are peed on by a rhino, and it stinks. I think there are ways that technology can help. I want to get back to what Keith talked about in terms of the touch, because I think the challenge here is that we have an ideal, and translating that into reality is by no means simple. So, for instance, the touch tanks with rays in them, I think we've all been to institutions, including major aquariums, where they have programs like this, where there's incredible monitoring, and I have literally watched kids maul animals. But it's impossible to monitor it entirely effectively. And I think at a certain point, the commitment to the individual animals is going to outweigh the desire to let people run amok. We would not tolerate this if people were in the wild. None of us would condone the idea of running up to a ray in the wild and grabbing it. So I think we have to really figure out where this does not compromise animal welfare, and in those situations, obviously it's a very desirable thing, and obviously domestic animals would be the starting point.
Bill Conway?
The idea of the iPod, of course, is just a progression of something that's been done for years in zoos. For example, the Zoo Key, if anybody is here old enough to remember them, that were used widely, and then the earphones. And the reason none of them were truly successful is they were too primitive. And now we have the instruments, as Johnny was saying, and we can do it. But I think you'll find acceptance, and eager acceptance in the zoos and by the public once you get the right instrument.
Eric?
Two quick predictions, one on technology and touch and the other on demographics. First, on the touch issue, if you look in old zoo books, which I love to do, there are many, many pictures of people riding tortoises, and right there with the zoo, I love Al Smith in the Central Park Zoo, for example. Obviously, I don't think that's going to happen, even if we have limited kinds of touch with some animals. But technology, I read the other day, there's a 3D camera that's being developed, and so I'd predict within 50 years not only will there be a three-dimensional camera, but the zoo will have a setup so that you can actually get your picture taken in the exhibit with the animal virtually, and this will be a $5 souvenir that you take home. And I think that given the fact that we're an electronic society. Kids will love this. It'll be wallpaper. It'll be cheap. You pay for it with your cell phone and you take it home. The second is demographics. Don's, graphics there are kind of scary, and I think the one thing that you didn't really mention was income. And unfortunately, that declining white population, the increasing Latino population also correlates somewhat with middle class incomes. So those $50,000 to $70,000 dollar per year families and the single parent families, those are at odds. How do you get that new demographic to be able to afford to go to the zoo, regardless of whether or not they want to go to the zoo? And I think that's going to be a major challenge, especially as our zoos, although they're called public, really are private in the sense that we need to pay an admission fee. I don't know if other people have ideas.
Thank you. Let me ask, how's the sound in the back of the room? Are you able to hear the comments? No. So, Bob, our sound guy, we have to worry a little bit about amplification here, and I hope we can maybe do some mid-course correction about that.
Can I?
Yes. I'm sorry. Who?
Well, I just want to go back to the touch thing for a minute, because I think this is a critical point. We were sitting here when you showed the Blade Runner image at the beginning. For those of you who know the story behind it, it's actually a very animal-based story. There's no animals in the future. They're all robotic, because we've wiped out everything. Toads and owls went first. And I'll go back to toads in a minute. And ultimately, it's very unsatisfying for people. Everyone keeps robotic pets. They look exactly like real pets. They act exactly like real pets. They feel. They're completely indistinguishable except the little panel you can open on the back. And there's this great hole in that society that's missing. I don't think there's any technology that's ever going to replace having a real experience with a real animal. And that is, I think, so crucial as people know the difference. There's a cognitive piece, there's not an emotional piece. And going back to what Ron said, and this is maybe one of the places we disagree, I thoroughly encourage people to go out and catch toads. I think it's a critical thing for kids to do growing up. I think until you've caught a toad in your own hand and it's peed all over you, you'll never know toads, and you'll never respect toads as adults. And saying, ooh, look, but don't touch is not an acceptable offering for a 4-year-old, because that's where it needs to go. So although I believe wholeheartedly what he said about the rays and captivity and how we handle those things, I think that goes back. The technology I don't think will ever replace our currency, which is these animal experiences that get rarer and rarer. And I think we're going to have to draw that line somewhere, because nature centers now, a lot of them say, go catch some toads. It's okay to catch some butterflies. This is part of how we all got here. I challenge the whole panel. Did any of you not catch toads, snakes, or butterflies as a kid? Did any of you go, ooh, I'm going to look but not touch? I don't know anybody in our field who came that way. So I think it's worth further discussion as we go ahead. But I think the touch thing is not about the physical touch. It's about the emotional connection that comes from experience an animal red in tooth and claw. And I think we'll hit that, I'm sure, many times over the next 2 days.
This is going to be a great discussion. We already have rhinos peeing on us and toads peeing on us. So, Don Moore.
I'd like to connect those dots in terms of just animal welfare science, and I'll touch on this a little bit tomorrow, but maybe a little bit deeper right now. We just put in an internal heart monitor in a male gorilla, and we're doing a lot of gorilla heart science right now. So imagine a future where there's an animal welfare internal monitor in all of these animals that we're using for touch programs, and it's giving us real-time data via computer to tell the keeper this animal's stressed and needs to be taken off exhibit right now. I can imagine that not in 50 to 100 years, but in 10 to 20 years. And I think we need to get there pretty fast, because I think this is really important in terms of connecting these urban kids back to the creeks and the woods that they're missing now. And maybe the major rule for zoos in terms of being kind to the toads is to teach these people who don't have access to the woods in their backyard, like we all did growing up, how to behave around wild animals and how to be nice to them.